So we're going live. Good afternoon. I'm just going to wait a few seconds here to make sure that we are indeed live and streaming. Confirming on that. Oh, there we go. Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Owen. I'm one of the attorneys here at Student Legal Services, and welcome to Debt and Collections today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Down below is a survey. I would appreciate it if everybody filled it out, but if you may need to say that you were here for some reason, for a class or some project, lead scholars, something of that nature, I'd really ask that you fill that out so that I know that you were here, just in case anybody asks. I'll have that link down there for about 24 hours or so, just to make sure that I can collect those and have that. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat. We will be periodically taking a peek over there and looking at that. And seeing who, if there's any questions that we have. And at that note, Patricia, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Patricia Dolohan. I'm one of the attorneys at Student Legal Services. I'm also the director. And myself, along with Jamie and Michelle, we pretty much handle all the civil matters. And anything criminal traffic, then that goes to Mr. Root.
Michelle, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Michelle Koo. I'm one of the civil attorneys here, along with Jamie and Patricia, and I also see students about different kinds of civil matters, and you'll hear that term used throughout the presentation today. It's a pretty broad term, and it covers, among other things, debts and collections, which is our topic for the day. So thanks for joining us.
And my name is Jamie Owen. I'm one of the attorneys here at Student Legal Services. If you've not heard of us, if you're a UCF student, as long as you're enrolled in classes, you have attorneys here. 3 of them are here today, along with another attorney, as Patricia referenced, Terry Ruth, who handles criminal and traffic matters. We handle civil. We do a lot of landlord-tenant, a lot of name changes, simple wills. And one of the things we also do is help people if they find themselves in collections or any issues, to try to help them out, whether it's just something that they weren't able to pay or something that's showing up on their credit that they're not sure of. That's really one of our functions here. If you are in a situation like that, you do need help, we're going to give you some tips today, kind of walk through a few things that we see. But also, as long as you're a student, you can come and see us for free. And our information about our office and how to contact us is down in the description box of this video. So I think the first thing, I hope Patricia and Michelle agree with me, that we'll say is that if you do find yourself with a debt, the number one thing that we always say is do not panic. We know that there's a lot of cultural stigma and pressure to be able to pay your bills and stuff like that. And it's really just something that sometimes happens. Nobody expects to lose their job due to a global pandemic, or to have an unexpected medical expense or something of that nature. So, that sort of stuff does happen. We totally get that. Try not to panic. If you do have something like that happen while you are here, one of the things to keep in mind is that here at UCF, there's lots of resources. I have some of them linked down below in the description box. UCF Cares, they're a great resource for helping students try to find resources both on campus and in the community to get some help. They can help students who maybe try to get them connected with food stamps if they're eligible for food stamps, emergency funding if you happen to qualify. all sorts of things. So we want you to know that's a resource for you here. We also have the Pantry, who's over in Farrell Commons, um, where All Night Study is, where you can get food, toiletries, rent a blazer if you need a blazer for an interview, all sorts of things for you. They're a great resource. And there's also another resource going on right now due to COVID, which is the HERF funding. They're in round 3. I have heard that they anticipate having enough funds to keep that open perhaps till mid-November. So if you've not taken advantage of that and you are having some issues, with paying your bills, or you need a little extra help, as we all do every once in a while, that's a resource there for you. And I've put that down below to see if you're eligible. Any student who's been enrolled in any semester since COVID, so basically spring 2020, even if you're not currently enrolled this fall, could potentially get an award. So I would encourage you to look into it. It also has now expanded for international students and some others who might not have originally been eligible. So make sure to keep a look at that. I think we're having Patricia end up going on and off. So it might just end up being Michelle and I for at least part of this today. It looks like she's having some technical issues. And Michelle, I don't think that all debts don't lead to a lawsuit.
Right, that's right. A lot of times they don't, and particularly, and I'm not sure, Jamie, what how much detail of each category you want us to go into. But yeah, a lot of times, a lot of the stuff we see here. Let me get a little closer to the mic. A lot of stuff we see here, as Jamie had mentioned, are rental issues. So a lot of students who live off campus, they move out, they may or may not have caused damages, but the landlord, let's say it's an apartment complex, found a way to charge them for some stuff after they moved out, whether the landlord's claiming they didn't leave it clean, or they caused some damages, or landlord had to repaint, or they didn't return all of their keys, fobs, X, Y, or Z, or for whatever other reason they leave owing some money. And it's particularly if there was no security deposit paid up front, because sometimes that happens. You move in on a special, you don't have to pay anything. The flip side of that is there's no money on deposit for when you move out if you get charged for something. So that's a pretty big category of what we see, particularly around beginning of fall, after a lot of people have moved out of places over the summer and they start getting hit with those charges. But we rarely actually see students being sued over that kind of debt. So if that happens to you, as Jamie mentioned, contact us. As long as you're enrolled, we can help you try to object to the charges. If there are some legitimate reasons to object, which often there are. If it's gotten further along, then if the landlord has already sent it to an outside collection agency, for example. So instead of apartment X, you're hearing from collection agency Y, a whole different name. Again, contact us. We can try to help you dispute the debt, and so forth. We'll go into details a little bit further in the presentation about specific steps we can take. But to Jamie's point, no, a lot of times the creditors will not go as far as suing in court. It costs them money. There are different reasons. It's not because they're trying to be such nice guys necessarily, but just there's lots of reasons for that. Mostly economic related. There's a lot of there are court costs involved, hassles involved. If it's run by a corporation, which just about all of these apartments are, then they have to litigate using attorneys. So those attorneys aren't cheap. So there are delays in the court process, particularly now with COVID. Courts are dealing with a big backlog of cases. So there's, it's not that you sue today, you get a court date next week. It's not that simple, and it's not that quick anymore.
Yeah, I think that's one good thing to remember, that even if it is a debt that we see sue on, and Michelle did a good segue. We'll probably kind of go into some of the debts we most see. Landlord tenant is certainly one of them. That's probably the number one reason I see a debt for a student. But you usually have some time, especially right now. Even if you are sued, you might have some time to try to negotiate, try to figure some things out. And then a lot of times that's not there. And one thing to remember is that people are always worried that if I'm sued, and like I said, we're going to touch on that a little bit later, they could take tape my check or something like that. Or if you're just in collections, they can do that. And maybe sometimes some unscrupulous collection agencies might threaten that. But one thing to remember is generally for a debt or money that you're owed, they just can't come and take your wages or seize your assets. They need to go to court to be able to do that, with perhaps the exception of like student loan debt and other debts owed to Uncle Sam. They can sometimes do things without going to court, like take your tax return and stuff like that. But for the most part, they do need to do that. Another one we see a lot is medical debts. Patricia, do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, so medical debts like debts from like leases, usually you're not going to be sued on it. So it's going to be on your credit, but you're not going to get sued on it. Most of the times you can negotiate with them. So ideally, and they don't report on your credit report until 6 months delinquent for medical debt. So most of the times you can negotiate something with them. There may be differences that you have as to why your insurance didn't pay for the debt. There may be some mistake that they didn't make a claim with your health insurance company, or maybe some other thing, like sometimes insurance companies require you to annually to let them know that you don't have any other insurance in place. And if you don't do that, they may deny your claim because of that. So a lot of medical debts, there's approaches you can take to try to get this paid. Maybe your insurance should have paid and it didn't. If you didn't have health insurance, you're usually able to negotiate with them for lower prices. Also, when dealing with hospitals, if it's non-for-profit hospitals, they have to kind of negotiate with you in good faith. So the best thing is not to ignore it. So if you get medical bills, or if you get, hopefully before it goes to collections, that you try to address it, and try to potentially enter into a payment plan or talk to your insurance company. So basically you just don't ignore it, because that's when it potentially can go to collections. But even once it goes to collections, you should be able to negotiate something and have it removed from collections.
Mhm. Yeah. That's one that's I always feel medical debt is particularly negotiable, for a lot of different reasons. The next one that we see, and we're just kind of going over some common ones that we see, is this is not an exhaustive list, is credit card debt or personal loan type debt. And these are the types of debts that we do see lawsuits on, and they can vary the type of lawsuits that's brought and the sort of defenses that there might be. Really kind of varies on the particular situation. There is a robust third-party market that purchases these debts from credit card companies, and sometimes they're the ones who sue after they've bought the debt. So we definitely do see these sued on, and there's that. If they get a judgment against you, that judgment can be good for up to 20 years. And once they get that judgment, they can come after wages and other assets that you have. But Florida has a lot of exemptions. So if you're in that situation, well, one, if you get sued, don't ignore it. It doesn't get better. Um, you definitely, if it's in small claims, things are a little bit different now due to COVID and the backlog and virtual, but still they might be able to be a negotiation done to try to help resolve that issue. And also, if you end up getting a judgment against you, just don't ignore it. You should really talk to someone to see if you're exempt from garnishment, or maybe the garnishment could be reduced. That's particularly true of students who work part-time for around minimum wage. There are some federal exemptions that might apply, and sometimes they're not always applied correctly. I recently saw this in a situation, so make sure that you kind of take care of those. And then I guess the next one that I see, or that we see not as often, fortunately, is from auto accidents. And these can be like the really, really big ones where we see students potentially being sued for large amounts of money. I think the biggest one I've ever seen was like 175,000 thereabouts. because the individual did not have adequate auto insurance, and the other side's insurance company paid out that money and then was coming back against the at-fault driver, the student, to get reimbursed for those funds. We did a presentation earlier this year in February that's available here on our channel that we addressed that, and we kind of addressed types of auto insurance and when situations like this can happen. But it's usually for failure to have enough bodily injury liability insurance. So we would recommend that you take a look at your policy and take a look at that. The unique thing is that debts relating to auto insurance, unlike any other source of debt, can result in your license being suspended. So this can be debt that's really important not to ignore, because if it does go to a judgment, your license can be suspended. And then if you're pulled over and your license is suspended and the officer believes that that is with knowledge, that can then be a criminal charge for you. So unique thing to auto accident related debt. I'm not talking about like car loans, but stuff related to an accident that you should be aware of. And like I said, in that previous presentation, we go in depth into auto insurance. We also have an even older one on our Facebook page if you want to take a look at that as well. So how do you know that you're in collection, Patricia?
Well, you may start getting phone calls even from like unknown numbers. You may get a letter on the mail saying that they're debt collector. You may notice that your credit score goes down, and you look up your credit report and you see like a collection there. So I probably say those are probably the most common ways that you're gonna find out that there's a collection account. And the important thing is not to ignore it. So under federal law, once they make their first contact with you, say that they're collecting the debt collector, they have 5 days to send you a letter telling you how much you supposedly owe and who the creditor is. And then you have 30 days to dispute and request verification from when you receive that letter. So it's really important that during that 30-day period, you dispute if you believe there's a dispute. If you don't recognize a debt, you don't recognize a creditor, and then you request verification, because that kind of stops a clock, and that they have to stop collecting until they provide you their verification.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes they never do. and I've had that happen where I've asked for verification and we never hear anything ever again.
Well, and the thing is, like, they don't have to provide you verification, but they have to stop collecting. Mm-hmm. So if they don't provide verification, they got to stop collecting. But the thing is, like, they're only required to provide that within those 30 days. So it's kind of important that you go ahead and do that within 30 days from when you receive that letter. And we always used to recommend that it's sent by certified mail return receipt requested, so you have proof that the collection agency got your letter. I know that the new rules to go into effect, I believe November 30th, they maybe will start contacting you via email. And in that situation, that you could dispute and request your verification by email as well.
Yeah, and we're, obviously, if you're a student, you can definitely come to see us. But one of the things that I have put down in the description box below is a link to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You might hear us refer to that as the CFPB. We know it's the acronym soup, but they have some sample letters that that you could use perhaps once you graduate and you're no longer a student here, that we can help with. That sort of thing. And I know sometimes when people get contacted by a collector, they might think it's a scam because it's not the original creditor. A lot of times it's ProCollect, Southern Management Systems, Hunter Warfield. We couldn't possibly name them all. I sometimes say that there's as many debt collection companies out there as there are cockroaches. And maybe that's the way I kind of feel about them, but they serve a purpose. But that's kind of one thing I think people think. And so, Michelle, do you want to maybe touch on some things that people could do if they, are worried that it's a scam to kind of try to make sure that they're all right?
Sure, you can always ask them, and they're supposed to identify whom they're collecting for, so that you can determine whether that's a debt that you recognize or not in terms of the original creditor. You can find out, you can check your own records, you can check your payment, the types of payment. So I'm looking at a different monitor now, and the other screen's not cooperating. But do you recognize the debt? You can always confirm with the original creditor. So if they say, okay, I'm collecting for the apartment complex that you lived at 2 years ago, they're saying you owe some money, you can always try to contact that apartment complex or whomever the creditor is to confirm that, did they transfer your account to XYZ collection company, whether it's ProCollect or one of these other collection agencies. You can check your credit report, which we always suggest that people do at least once a year anyway. You can do it for free. With COVID, you can do it more often for free now. And pull your credit reports from all 3 national credit bureaus, see what appears on there. Oftentimes there are errors. So for different reasons, sometimes people with similar sounding names, their credit files get mixed with someone else's credit information, and it's not even your debt. Might be your debt, but the information about it may be wrong, like dates, amounts due, things like that may be wrong. So always, you can always check the information on there and see. And of course, if you see any inaccuracies on your credit reports, you have a right to dispute those as well. We won't go into a lot of detail about credit reporting errors in this presentation, but that is something else we help with. And certainly you have a right, besides disputing it with the collection agency, like we've talked about a couple minutes ago, you have a right to dispute entries on your credit report that you think are not accurate too. So, and one of the other red flags that something might be a scam is that instead of asking you to pay through traditional payment methods, they're asking you to send gift cards, or they're sending you to use some other form of payment that's not traditionally used, and it's harder to dispute or harder to prove if something goes wrong later. So just be wary of that. I mean, legitimate collectors are not going to ask for a payment through buying gift cards or through things like that. So just be careful, and always check out the information that they're claiming they are contacting you regarding.
And just remember that even if that's for payment right then and now, they, under federal law, they have to do that validation notice within 5 days. So we should always request, okay, go ahead and submit my validation notice, because then you can do a request for reinvestigation, asking, for proof that you actually owe that debt, and who the original creditor is if you don't recognize the creditor. The other thing is, like, collection agencies need to be registered in Florida, so you can always check if the collection agency is registered in the state of Florida. I think the Department of Financial Affairs is supposed to annually file something with them and report who's working for them and pay a fee. The other thing, like, look them up on Sunbiz. Sunbiz is like the names of companies, so you can look under Sunbiz under a fictitious name or as the name of the corporation, see who owns it, see if they match. You see if the addresses that they report on Sunbiz, which is the Department of State for Florida, matches with what they're telling you where they're located. So there's various things you can do to kind of protect yourself.
Okay. Correct. And down below, since we talked about credit reports, I just want to let you guys know that I did link to the form where you can request your credit reports. One of the things we recommend is checking that at least annually, if not more often. Right now, I believe through April of 2022, I can't believe I'm saying 2022, you can get it once a week. Due to COVID, they agreed to do that. And we really recommend using the dial-in function or mail in the form versus online. They ask things like when you opened a certain account, and I don't know about you guys, but I don't exactly remember the month and year when I opened a certain account. it might have been some time ago. They can ask about former addresses, and you might not know what's been associated with your credit. So it can be really tricky. So usually it's easier to either call in or mail in. You will need to get it mailed to the address that's associated with your consumer account. So not like a parent's address, maybe not necessarily where you're living for school. We have gotten a question, and I will transition to that quickly. And then we'll be talking a little bit more about what you can do if you are in collections. And I just want to remind you that, submit your questions. We have a little bit more of content, and then we'll be wrapping up where we will be more than happy to answer some of those other questions. So someone asked, how significant are medical debts on credit? And nobody tells us exactly how they come up with that mystical 3-digit number that is supposedly a reflection of how risky a person you are. But it's not as impactful, is our understanding, as certain other sorts of debts. I kind of think
I
the
don't
way.
think medical debts, I don't think medical is weighted as much in terms of James referring to the credit score that people often hang their hats on and put a lot of stock in. And she's right, that's considered a trade secret, how the companies that come up with the score determine that score. But medical debts are not weighted as heavily as other things. So for example, if you want to make sure you're paying your credit cards on time, if you can, and paying other kinds of loans on time, because those things, if you're late, will impact your credit score and your credit rating. But medical debts are not weighted as heavily. We can't exactly quantify that with a number and tell you, okay, it's going to, if you owe a medical debt of X amount, it's going to drop your score by so many points. We can't really correlate it like that with accuracy, but it's weighted a little bit less and considered a little bit differently.
You also have to consider like how old it is. So the older debt is, the less impact it has. And you should check when they're reporting the debt as when it accrued, because it's not supposed to be on the collection agency got the debt from the doctor, but it's supposed to be like when you didn't pay it. So if they report to collections 2 years later, the date they should be reporting was 2 years ago, not the date the collection agency got it. So I've seen that mistake where credit reporting agency just got it, now they're reporting that it was accrued as of December 2020, but the person was at the hospital 2 years ago, 2018, so it should be shown 2018. So that's something that you can request the credit reporting agency and the collection agency to report the correct date, because that's a violation for them not to do that. So the older it is, the less impact it has. If you're gonna try to settle and pay something, you want to make sure that it's a payment in full. So you have something in writing saying it's a payment in full, because you don't want to make a payment thinking you paid it in full, but they treating it as a partial payment. It makes kind of revives the debt, makes it now newer than it should be, because there's a statute of limitations as to when they can file a lawsuit. So for medical, that'll be 4 years. So if they don't file within 4 years, they cannot go after you anymore. So, if you're going to settle the debt after 2 years or 3, you want to make sure that, they got something saying it's for a zero balance. So they should send you a piece of work saying we'll accept X amount of dollars in full settlement. So you have something like that. And the other thing is to negotiate to have them remove the trade line from the credit report.
Well, they have to. The one unique thing about medical debt,
okay,
due to a settlement for some alleged misconduct on behalf of the credit reporting agencies, TransUnion, Equifax, Experian, is that if it's considered paid in full, it is supposed to be removed from your credit. Now, for medical debt only, trying to get them to remove other sources of debt, like say an apartment complex says that I owed X from when I moved, let's say $1,000 from when I moved out 2 years ago, and I negotiate with let's say Southern Management Systems, who's a frequent flyer for landlord tenant debt, to take 500. one of the things I'd want to do is make sure that it was with the agreement that they delete the trade line, which is the industry term for taking it off your credit report. One of the other things about medical debt is that there can be some very large medical bills, but because you just don't pay one person when you have medical debt, if you've ever had any procedures, you know you probably get so many bills it's hard to keep track of, is that something that was never over $100 doesn't count towards your score. So if you have a, you know, a
Yeah, like a
share of
lab
costs,
test or something.
yeah, share of costs that was less than $100, even if it goes to collections, it doesn't count against your credit score. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So one of the things we were just talking about is one of the ways to deal with debt is to negotiate. Debt is very negotiable, especially a lot of times once it gets to collections. And that is definitely something that we help out with. We definitely recommend trying to do a lump sum instead of a long-term payment plan. I think all of us have had situations where we've seen a long-term payment plan just not work out for the student. And then, you know, whatever reduced amount or whatever deal you might have cut has not worked out, you know, so we really kind of recommend that you try to keep it to maybe a series of 3 payments or something like that to try to get it taken care of if you need to do that. If you're getting calls from collectors, you don't need to talk to them. You can ask them not to call you. They still can mail you stuff, but they won't necessarily have to talk to you. You can block their number. You can just not answer. In fact, if I don't know the number, my habit is not to answer because there's so many scams going around. And there's a letter is one of those sample letters from the CFPB that's kind of like that. Do not call. Now, there are times where we've talked about not ignoring it, and that's true. You need to look at it, make sure it's something that you know, that it's the right amount, that there isn't some other reason to dispute it. It's not some debt from like 10 years ago that they shouldn't even be trying to collect from you anymore. But there are times where it's like, if it's a medical bill and you're going through a tough time and your priority is just trying to keep a roof over your head and food on the table, there are times where it's just, okay, set it to the side for a little bit. Those are debts that are typically not sued on. I think I've seen one lawsuit for medical debt, and it was a very strange situation in my career. I don't know if Patricia or Michelle seen any.
Only one many years ago, probably 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I just don't see it.
Yes, I have heard it happens in other states, so I can't say that's a universal experience in other states, but I think just the way that our system is set up with collections and garnishment and stuff like that, it's just not something we see a lot. And you know, if you're really drowning in you know, you're trying to make your situation better and potentially you're going to have some lawsuits for whatever reason, there is always bankruptcy. It's not appropriate for everybody, um, but you know, it is a solution. We do some Chapter 7 bankruptcies here in our office, not all the time. It's not always the best solution, like I said, but you do have that option. And while yes, it does impact you and it does impact you for some number of years, it is sometimes a really good way just to kind of be able to take a deep breath, you know, and kind of stop worrying about some things and be able to put some things behind you. It's not an easy process. It's definitely, you have to share all of your information. You have to make sure that every single person you might possibly owe money is included in it. But it really can give you a fresh start and can be a good way to take a deep breath when you're in a situation like that. I don't see any other questions, so I don't know, Michelle, if you had anything else you'd like to add or any words of final words of wisdom.
I don't think so. I think we've covered the basics of it. As to your last point about bankruptcy, it is something we assist with. Every person's individual financial situation is a little different. So if you're serious about that or want to find out more, then please feel free to make an appointment with our office if you're currently enrolled, and we'd be happy to schedule a sit down, in-person phone or Zoom consultation with you so we can go over the steps in more detail, because that in and of itself is usually about an hour-long consultation, during which we give you about a 30-page questionnaire to take home and fill out and return to us, ask you for more information. But it's kind of a last resort way to get rid of some debt, as Jamie mentioned. But otherwise, and that's not a lot of what we see. Mostly, as just to recap what we said before, mostly we see students contacting us for rental debts, rental or apartment debts, sometimes medical debt, sometimes credit card debts. The auto insurance, auto accident thing also sometimes comes up, although when they first come in, sometimes that doesn't present itself right away, because what happens is the student allegedly was at fault, and then if they injured somebody else, it may take a little while for that other party to actually incur those medical bills. And again, depending on that other party's insurance status and insurance coverages, it may take a little while for that claim to present itself. But when it does, it will kind of rear its ugly head in a way. Sometimes that's not pleasant, particularly because it can impact your license. So again, if you encounter any of those situations, please feel free to contact our office as long as you're enrolled, so that we can try to help you out.
Patricia?
I would just basically say, don't ignore it. I mean, that's the biggest mistake that you can make. And it's kind of a natural tendency to throw away things you don't want to look at, but you just don't. I mean, there's always a remedy, there's always some way of addressing it. If you kind of just ignore it, then you're going to automatically lose, kind of thing. So if it's a debt collection, you get that letter. If you are here, then contact us. A disputed, request verification. If you sued or ignore it, because you're automatically going to lose and you're going to get a judgment entered against you. So most of the things can be negotiated, like even with the auto type of incidents we're talking about, where people are, getting these letters for like $20,000 and things like that. Most of the times they really, they can be persuaded to lower significantly. So it's just don't wait until your driver's license is suspended or you being sued. Because if there's a large amount of money, if you don't respond and ignore it, then the next thing would be being sued, and that just going to increase your stress level much more. So it's always better to address things early on. The other thing with debt collection, just like I said, statute of limitations, most debt collections, credit card, like 4 years, because they usually sue you like on account stated or on just enrichment type of thing. So, the older that is, the less impact it has. So those are all things to think about it. And for the bankruptcy, you're probably looking if you have a lot of debt and it's relatively new. So if it's pretty old, you're probably better off just sitting out and see what happens. But if it's a lot and it's new and you're not going to be able to pay it, then it may be a good remedy.
Yeah, I think that's there's sometimes strategic ignoring. So if it's been 3.5 years or 4 years, maybe, and they haven't sued you, maybe you just kind of wait and see, rather than take the drastic step of bankruptcy that'll be on your credit report for Chapter 7, which is all we do here is 10 years. It's not fatal, it's not fatal to have something in collections on your credit report. There are things that can be done at all steps of the way. But sometimes, like I said earlier, if you're in crisis, then you just have to think of that. One thing I do not like doing is students who use student loan money sometimes to try to settle some of these. If you get a student loan, they're not generally dischargeable in bankruptcy. So converting a dischargeable debt to a non-dischargeable is not one that I generally would recommend. But we're here to talk to you about the debts, talk to you about your options. It never hurts to do a verification letter. Sometimes we never hear anything further. And so, that can be a really good way, and you definitely have options. That's why it's so important not to panic, not to feel guilty or shame. It happens to a lot of people, and just sometimes there's just things we just cannot control for. Especially over the last year and a half, there's been a lot that's just not been in our control, and we understand that, and we're here for you. So again, our contact information is down there in the description box, as well as some of the links that we have, the survey. I would really appreciate it, especially if you're here because you need this. So there's some sort of record that you watched today. So just in case I'm ever asked, I can provide that for you. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, maybe consider it. It helps us out, and we don't post a ton, so you're not going to be spammed, but you'll get some notification when we have some future presentations scheduled, or some other content we're going to be having coming hopefully very, very soon to share with you guys. They'll be a little bit shorter and to the point than some of these other things. I don't see any more questions, so I think that will be it for us today. Really appreciate you guys spending some of your time with us this afternoon. This presentation will be available on replay, usually pretty shortly after we post, but sometimes it takes up to 24 hours depending on YouTube. But it will be available through the direct link right after we finish. So in case you feel like somebody should be watching this one. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye.